Hi, friends. Every year, more and more schools are providing some kind of summer math practice for their students. And we want to say thank you to the many Principal Matters listeners who've chosen Summer Pops as their summer math resource. For new listeners, Summer Pops are workbooks designed for elementary and middle school students to practice their math over the summer. And after looking over the workbooks myself, I have found Summer Pops to be engaging, easy to use, and content rich. Demand is high this year, so act soon. Visit summerpopsworkbooks.com today. Summer Pops math workbooks are published by Better Learning Education. All workbooks are printed in the USA. Another quick word before we jump into today's show. Principal Matters listeners have been reaching out with interest in being a part of a book study for Jen Schwanke's The Principal's Guide to Conflict Management. And because the interest in the book has been high, we have partnered with ASCD and ISTE to provide a book study on a new platform called Connect. If you'd like to participate in this free opportunity and you're an ASCD or ISTE member, please join us at a live book study to be held Monday, April 22nd at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The event will be followed by a Q&A on Tuesday, April 23rd at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Both events will occur on Connect. You can find this at connect.iste.org. Simply log on to the Connect platform using the ISTE or ASCD credentials and follow the prompts. If you're not a member and don't wish to participate in this platform, take a look at some of the other offerings on Jen's website at jenschwanke.com, or you can check out the offerings at my website at williamdparker.com. We are excited to partner to provide various levels and formats for professional development, training, and support for leaders like you. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed today's show. Principal Matters Podcast, episode 390. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. This week, we're going to talk about Mindshifts for Leaders with my special guest, Dr. T.J. Vari. Dr. T.J. Vari is the Deputy Superintendent in the Appoquinimink School District. TJ is a former middle school assistant principal and former high school English teacher. His master's degree is in school leadership and his doctorate is in innovation and leadership. He holds several honors and distinctions, including his past appointment as president of the Delaware Association for School Administrators and the Paul Carlson Administrator of the Year Award. He teaches education leadership courses at the master's and doctoral levels, and he has co-authored 5 books, including his 2 latest, 7 Mindshifts for School Leaders Finding New Ways to Think About Old Problems, and Retention for a Change. He's a national presenter on the topics of school leadership and the co-founder of the Schoolhouse 302, a leadership development institute. TJ Vari, welcome back to Principal Matters Podcast. You were on a long time ago, Principal Matters episode 285 with Dr. Joe Jones and Dr. Principal Salome Thomas L. But man, I am so excited to bring you back into this room. Why don't you fill in the gaps in that intro? Tell listeners something they may be surprised to know about you.
I think listeners might be surprised to know that I was a horrible student. As much as I spend my days helping kids to learn and reflect and trying to be innovative in schools and creating the best transcripts possible for our graduates, I didn't feel like I had a ton to take advantage of as a young person, and that led me to kind of flounder around in the system. I made it through, probably found my stride in learning by the time I was maybe a junior in college. Mm-hmm. So everything that I know, I've learned since then. Maybe some life lessons early on, for sure, as a knucklehead kid. But I always tell people, when I tell people something that I know, that's something that you learn in high school, I always let them know that I learned it after high school on my own, because I didn't learn. And it was my fault, right? It wasn't anybody else's. It wasn't my parents. There wasn't environmental factors that led to that. I just wasn't connected to the school as a community, and I was a horrible student, and I hate to think that I have any teachers or school principals out there of my own who are listening to this saying, yeah, that's true. And we didn't think you were going to make it. So praise be to the Lord.
I'm glad you started with that intro, TJ. And when I talk about my school years, I describe myself as a roller coaster kid, because if I was interested and engaged and all in, then my grades reflected it. But then when my brain went someplace else, or I was interested in something else, or I was completely bored, I could just plummet. And so I was just like this roller coaster all the way through school. And yeah, I mean, I think I've thought the same thing many times, that if I went back to my own school community, I think they'd be shocked that Will Parker is full-time helping development with school leaders. And so, TJ, it just gives me hope, though. I mean, if you and I, if you and I can get to the place where we are today, then it also gives us hope for our kids and our students, because I know, just like you, I've sat across from many students and had that hard conversation with them, and just had to say to them, listen, we're not all perfect. Here's some of the bumps in the road that I've hit.
Yeah.
And I want to come back to those bumps in the road for you, because you have such a unique background. Before we go there, I want to give you just a second or a minute to celebrate what's happening in Appoquinimink School District. What are some things that have been going on there? And let's give some shout outs to some of your folks.
Yeah, for sure. So kudos to you for saying Appoquinimink. Most people just say Appo, so we give you extra points for even trying. Working in the Appoquinimink School District, and I'm proud of the work that we're doing here. I've been the assistant superintendent, now the deputy superintendent, for the last 9 years. And I oversee the middle and high schools as well as the district operations. And I could go in any number of directions with celebrations. I really could, because our departments are phenomenal. Our curriculum instruction people are phenomenal. Our operations people are phenomenal. But I'm going to give a quick shout out to our pathways work, and our portrait of a graduate, and the evolution of that over time, and the number of people who are out there working on making sure that kids have work-based learning within every pathway, and our team ensuring that all kids have a transcript that's attractive to colleges and universities, and the fact that it works. Our kids are having access to colleges and universities at rates that they haven't before. And 94% of our students who go to four-year colleges persist from year 1 to year 2. That's an important statistic for graduation rates. And I could go on and on. We had a year recently where 100% of our students who applied to a really highly selective university, 100% of them got in who applied. And we're just proud of that work. We find 2 myths, Will, and you know this. The first myth is that if you go to high school and you do well, that you're prepared for college. And that's not true, unfortunately, of every institution in America. And we have too many kids graduating from our high schools around the country and having to take remedial classes and not feeling supported in college, and ultimately not making it to that second or third year. We've cracked that code in Appoquinimink. Our kids are prepared. Many of our kids come back from really tough colleges and universities and say that high school was harder than what they're experiencing. And that's a good thing for us to hear. And the second myth is that if you go to a high school in America, that you will be ready for a career. That might sound a little controversial, but it's just not true. The statistics out there are that if you don't have a viable industry credential or an associate's degree at the floor of what's needed in our industries, if you don't have a certificate that can earn you money, you're very likely to live a hard life of poverty and the inability to find a living wage. And that living wage right now has been defined at $43,000 for an earner. Mm-hmm. And so I hate it when people say kids are going to be college and career ready unless we can back that up with what we're doing. And I can say confidently that our kids are college ready. and we've got some industry certificates, and we need to do a better job telling every one of our kids, you got to go somewhere. You got to get into the industry to get the certificate, or you have to get an associate's degree. We want to figure out free college as a next step for all of our pathways. And I could go on and on. I'll stop there because you could get me on here for an hour talking about just pathways and college readiness, but we've got a team of people who are doing a phenomenal job with it. And I'd be happy to name them by name, but there's too many of them. So you know who you are out there, and I don't want to miss somebody. But the Appoquinimink School District's team who works on this at the school level and the district level in terms of what it takes from every counselor, every work-based learning specialist, every CTE teacher, every pathway and department lead. It's an amazing undertaking, but our kids are benefiting and it's working.
I love that, TJ. I'm going to give a quick personal anecdote. I have a son who's a senior, and at the time of this recording, we're stepping into the end of first semester. At the time this recording comes out, we'll actually be in second semester. So we'll see how this unfolds. But here's a student with a really high ACT score, which is in Oklahoma, typically what they're taking for college entrance. Plus, he's passed 3 advanced placement courses. But the second semester of his senior year, he's actually enrolling in one of our technology center exploration programs because he's still trying to decide if he wants to do college or industry certification, because he loves working with his hands, but he's also really scholarly. And so what I love is the fact that we now have opportunities in your community and mine where students have those options, because you can think back to when we were in high school, and man, those pathways weren't that clear. So congratulations on being in a place that has been that targeted in helping kids identify where they're going, but then also being prepared enough that they can persist once they're there. Mm-hmm. And so you're right. I think we could stay here for a long time, but what I would like you to do right now, in this may connect to what you just explained, TJ, and I want you to bring your story into this scenario, because sometimes I think that, well, I'm going to not say sometimes, I think in the case of your own leadership, a lot of the priorities that you have helped lead are personal. You were that student who struggled. And so can you talk a little bit more about your background, how it led you into the business world, which brought you into the education world, but how that framework has helped you think differently about school leadership?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's also something that's a shout out to high school principals listening. And this isn't just a high school problem, but it rests with the high school leadership, is that we have to think about the economy, our community's economy. And a lot of times we think about graduating students, and we have to think about what their experiences are going to be after we graduate them, and how do they interface with the college environment locally or around the country if they're blessed enough to be able to go away to college, and how that is going to get them back into the economy. Now, if you care a lot about your local economy, you'll do this with that in mind. But I had my business hat on when I arrived. I'll try to be brief here. I was an education major. I decided by the time I was a junior and senior in high school that I wanted to teach kids. Can tell a little bit more about that story later if you want. I wanted to teach kids, and I wanted to learn. I wanted to teach English. English literature, writing, reading became a real passion of mine over time. But coming from a working household background, I started working when I was 14, and that was in the restaurant industry. And I worked clear until I was 21 through college, put myself room and board. My parents paid tuition, but I had to take care of everything else. And so I was working full time. And when I showed up to get my master's degree in fine arts at the University of Wisconsin after I'd graduated, because I wanted to write, I wanted to read, I wanted to teach, I wanted to do so many things. I went into a local restaurant. And because of my background for between 14 and 21, the owner of the restaurant said, we're looking for a manager. I was just looking for a bartending gig so that I could keep putting myself through school. He was like, we're looking for a manager. The salary was something that I couldn't turn up as somebody who wasn't making any money at the time, new to Madison, Wisconsin. And I spent a bunch of years in the restaurant industry, and I worked my way up from a manager to a general manager to running 2 stores. And then I was headhunted by a corporate environment. And my job was to go around and take restaurants that were in the red and get them into the black. And what that means for anybody out there who's, maybe doesn't understand that lingo is that the restaurants weren't doing very well. They weren't making any money. And my job was in a short period of time to turn them around. And I think those were the best lessons in leadership that I ever learned. It was, 0 to hero in every environment. But when you go into a failing spot and you see the things that need to change, and luckily in a corporate atmosphere, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I knew what the formula was. They had a successful formula. And so I needed to implement that formula and replicate over and over. And I learned so much. And I woke up one day, I realized that I was teaching people. And it was about money and cheeseburgers. And that just wasn't good enough for me. And so I thought, what better thing to do than to go back into public education, which was my original vision. And as soon as I showed up in my first school, I realized that there was a leadership void on top of it. And that's not the industry's fault. We take teachers, good teachers, and make them assistant principals, and assistant principals become principals, and principals become directors. And those jobs are so vastly different in almost every other industry. As you move up, it's just a little bit different of a skill, or you're managing people with similar skills as you. These jobs, I mean, the difference between a teacher and assistant principals are 2 different jobs. The difference between an assistant principal and a principal is 2 different jobs. And there's no way to learn that. And luckily I had enough experience in industry that I was able to lean on those leadership lessons that I learned, and ultimately became a turnaround school leader too, of a principal of a turnaround school during No Child Left Behind. And I think about leading restaurants every day, including today.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Why is IXL used in 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts? Because it works. IXL is research proven to benefit all student populations, including English language learners and special education classrooms. IXL is an all-inclusive online learning and teaching solution for K-12 that accelerates achievement, saves teachers time, and more. This one platform helps you accomplish what normally would require dozens of other tools. For example, as students practice skills, IXL automatically differentiates learning to help them master concepts at their own pace. Teachers get real-time insights into how students are performing so they can provide timely support. What I personally love about IXL are the personalized SAT and ACT study plans. Students just need to enter their most recent test score, and IXL automatically generates a custom list of skills they should work on to improve their scores. Discover what IXL can do for your school. Visit IXL.com/PM today. Well, and there is a lot more of that story, because you and I have talked offline, that you haven't been able to say in that short summary. But what I love about your story, TJ, is you were a turnaround business manager before you ever became a turnaround principal. And I'll have to say that and I've talked about this in my own professional development with leaders too, that I think one of the biggest sticking points for leaders when they're going from classroom to administration, whether it's as an AP or a principal, especially as a building leader, is not having a business background. It's sometimes the organizational structures, the management part, the responsibility areas of other people that really throws you off, because you're used to curriculum, you're used to behavioral management, but trying to figure out how to marry that understanding of instruction with the managing of people can really be the part that frustrates leaders the most. So I want to just sit here for a few minutes, because we're going to talk about mind shifts for leaders, but I think this is so important. As that restaurant leader, now a turnaround principal, and now you're a developer of leaders, what are a couple of those things that from that experience in business that you were able to apply in school leadership that you found helpful?
Yeah, there's a ton. Will, I'd like to spend a whole podcast maybe talking just about this sometime if you'll have me back. But a couple of lessons. The first lesson is there's typically a way that works best. And so we got to find that way that works best. We get an 80% yield from 20% of the things we do, and we need to do those 20% of things more often. And I give you a couple of examples. In the restaurant industry, the fryer has to be at a certain temperature and the French fries have to be down in that oil for a certain number of minutes. And if either one of those variables is off, the fries are down for too short, or they're down for too long, or the oil is not the right temperature, you're going to get a crappy French fry. Now, that might seem simple to people who are listening out there, but go on to John Hattie's Visible Learning MetaX and search by effect size, and you're going to find a jigsaw. And a jigsaw works for teaching kids better than any other teaching strategy. What's at the top of the list for culture, collective, and self-efficacy? How do you do that? Well, there's books out there to help you learn how to build teacher, self, and collective efficacy. It permeates the staff. So that's lesson number one. There are things that work better and things that work best than the things that we're currently doing. If you have the playbook, use it. And when people aren't following the recipe, they need to be shown how to follow the recipe. And that brings me to the second thing, is if people are shown how to follow the recipe and they're supported, and I can say more about pressure and support models, if they don't know how to do that, they need to be given a performance improvement plan, which I firmly believe will help people to improve. And sometimes they're not a good fit. And that's probably hard for people to hear out there, especially during a shortage. But if you have the responsibility in your organization to hire people, you also have the responsibility in your organization to fire people. And lots of times we accept our responsibility to hire, but not our responsibility to improve the people we have. And because that's hard work. And that's one of the reasons we wrote Candid and Compassionate Feedback, because the candor doesn't exist necessarily. We call that a culture of nice in our environment, because we're not measuring the bottom line on a day-to-day basis. In the restaurant industry, I had to call in my numbers every night before the restaurant closed. That's a serious amount of accountability. In schools, we barely have the numbers on a quarterly basis. And so that's the third lesson. What are you measuring, and how often can you measure it? How do you know you're being successful? When the test scores come back in June and July? That's not good enough. And that's also not the only indicator of success. I just said 94% of our students persist from freshman to sophomore year. Do you know how hard it is to collect that data in a district with 13,000 students? But we have to know if that is if our pathways are working. So I think I'll leave there with those three. I'm going to add a fourth. This is for my operations people. The place has to be safe and clean. If the place is not safe and clean for a sense of belonging with the students and a sense of pride with where we walk into every day, then start over. Because learning doesn't occur in a place that's not safe and clean, and teachers don't have sense of collective efficacy when the place is not safe and clean. So these are simple rules. Like, these are simple things, but I don't know if they're on the top of every principal's mind as they enter their school every day. So I appreciate a space like this for you allowing me to share that. And I hope somebody gets something from it. Heck, I'll give you my telephone number. They can call me and I'll talk to them about it until their heart's delight.
We will definitely share your contact info at the end, TJ. But what I love about that feedback is that I know that every one of those is born from experience. There are things that work. When people are showed away and supported, then they're going to improve, or they can find a different place to work. Measure growth, and how do you know that you're being effective? And then how do you create a place of belonging and pride for those students, which are all, but I know that those are born from an individual, in your case, who, it's full circle, who was that student who didn't feel like school was really delivering for them, but then at some point figured out how to love learning, but then was committed to, how do I create the kind of place that I wish I had had as a kid myself? And how do I maintain the kind of growth that I want to see for students? And so I just have to pause for a second, because it's impossible for me not to analyze leadership, but the title of the book that you talked about earlier, Candid and Compassionate Feedback, I think that tension is so wise, because you just gave some really practical ways for leaders to look at their work, but it's also housed within the context of why would you want to do that? And the why you would want to do that is because you want a place that every student can show up to that has effective learning happening. And so it's that compassion for your students, and the desire to see them be successful, or let's just say a passion for that drives that kind of focused leadership. And I know I'm a broken record for my listeners, but I just have to keep saying this. There's a tension in leadership, TJ, and you and I have talked about this. There's a tension in leadership that people tend to fall on one or the other side. Either they're like, let me just build relationships and be really compassionate and create a place of belonging, or they fall on the side of, let me create like some really strong rituals and procedures and policies, and I want everything in here to run like a tight ship. And the truth is, you actually want both. You actually want both.
Yeah, you're so right about that, Will. Here's what I say to people, because I have mantras that I tell myself, and this is one of them. If you think you have a supportive environment, but you're not putting pressure on people, what you're supporting is a status quo. And the status quo will always get worse. I'm going to repeat that for your listeners. The status quo will always get worse. Sometimes it's imperceptible, but the status quo is constantly on a decline. You might not see it because it's incremental, but you cannot maintain the status quo. Conversely, if you have an environment where you put pressure on people without support, that's not fair. People can sniff that out right away. Wait a second. You're asking me to do what? And I don't have the tools to do that. So here's another fifth lesson with resources. When we showed up to those restaurants, we made sure those people had everything that they needed. And by and large, we could always find broken burners. The fryer doesn't work anyway. You're telling me the temperature. I don't have the right ladle for this thing. The pans are sticking. It's ludicrous. And so that's something that has to change in education over time. But principals need to really think, do these people have the tools to do what we're asking them to do? And then you can put pressure on them. And the more support you inject, the more pressure you can put. And that's the balance. That's why we wrote Candid and Compassionate Feedback, by the way, because everybody says culture is king. Culture is determined by our ability to give feedback to people so that they can get better at the work we're expecting them to do. Because everybody thinks that they want to feel better at work, which is not true. What you want to be is better at it. And the only way you get better at it is through mechanisms of feedback. And I'll say one last thing. The title of that book before it got to the publisher was offensive. The word offensive. And the premise was that if you go around in your organization trying not to offend people, that's actually offensive. And the people who are offended in an environment like that are the kids, because they end up with the bad end of the stick because we're not working to get better at our job supporting them. So I know it's a mouthful, but it's probably the number one thing that I still think leaders need: the ability to give feedback. It's a skill, the ability to have a culture where everyone is learning, and the ability to create a culture where everybody's getting better towards a significant goal.
I'm smiling, even though this is an audio recording, because you're making me think of another mantra that I like. And this came from an education professor I had back when I was getting my bachelor's degree, whose name's not coming to me right now, but I can still see him saying this, because I remember scratching my head, like, what is that supposed to mean? But he used to start off a lot of his lessons, and he was an old teacher who had become a professor, by saying disequilibrium is the beginning of education. And he would say it just like that, just really, and I was like, what does that mean? And it wasn't until I became a teacher that I understood what he was trying to say to us over and over and over again, which is, unless you are willing to shake the thinking of someone else, student, teacher, yourself, you have no place for movement and growth. And so TJ, I think it's so funny that you chose that word offensive. And then, of course, I had to change it for your publishing, because what we're trying to say in all these conversations is that every school environment, every learning community, every building should be a replication of a great classroom. And every great classroom teacher spends their time making students uncomfortable in their knowledge so that they can push back and search and be curious and try to figure out the answers. And so you're right. If the goal with those whom we're supporting is that they stay comfortable, then they're never going to grow. And so, but I also like how you said that pressure without support is not fair either. And so the goal isn't just to make people uncomfortable. The goal is to take them to another place in their growth and in their learning. And so if we're committed to education, then we're committed to that cycle of disequilibrium and offense, which leads to discovery and learning, which leads to growth, which leads to analysis of, did it work? And then we start all over again. And if our goal is to get to that place where we're not in that cycle anymore, then we need to leave the profession, because that's what it's all about. I can tell right now we can talk for 3 hours, TJ, and I'm never going to get through all my questions with you. So let me let you respond to that, and then I have a follow-up.
No, I second everything that you're saying. I mean, the thing about comfort is that it's not really what people are asking for anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so, listen, leaders who are listening, school principals, assistant principals, if you're working to make people feel more comfortable, you're never going to get there, because that's not what people are asking. When people want more comfort or more support, what they're really saying is, I need tools and I need you to allow me to take risks. I need resources. I need professional development. I need to feel confident, and I need to know you have my back. That's what they're saying. Not, let me continue to do what I've always done. It might come out that way, but that's not what they're asking for. It might sound like that, but all the literature on this topic says that people need to grow at work to feel connected to it.
Let me give you an opportunity to speak to one of your books. And by the way, congratulations on all the work you've done supporting and providing feedback and content to leaders. You've co-authored 5 books. You do a lot of professional development, not only in your own state, but across the U.S. So let's just take a moment, give a quick shout out to your book on the 7 mind shifts for school leaders. What are some things that folks may want to be thinking about if they want to check out that read?
Yeah, thanks for that, Will. So 7 mind shifts for school leaders, finding new ways to think about old problems. Wrote that book with Joe Jones. We always write everything together, and Connie Hamilton. Actually, we just published our 6th book, should be hitting people's homes in December. I could talk about that maybe on another episode, but 7 mind shifts for school leaders. That book, it's not a COVID book, but it was born from the concept that during COVID, we moved fast with innovation and we solved problems that had been persistent forever, like connectivity, one-to-one. So even districts that went one-to-one, they sent the kids home, they had the devices, and then they couldn't connect. Then we called the Verizon and AT&T, and we got all these stations hooked up and MiFi devices. All of a sudden, we had 13,000 plus kids. They were all connected, and we were driving out to their houses and making sure they were, and it worked. And how come that problem had been going on for a decade? Mm-hmm. And we were giving out one-to-one devices, but we weren't making sure the kids could even use them at home. Some kids don't even have electricity. We were solving that problem. And any number of other persistent issues. So that book starts with a filter that we call leading with a crisis mindset, that puts your problems through a filter of, is this important, is it urgent, and is it persistent? And if it's not all three, then it's not a useful problem to solve with the models that we provide. The 7 mind shifts are 7 models. Well, if you've ever done an exercise like a SWOT analysis, and you realize when you're done the SWOT that there's information that emerged and thinking that emerged before you did the SWOT, that's what the 7 mind shifts are. There's 7 models for putting your old thinking through the ringer, and to see if there's not new thinking that emerges. We don't propose to solve all of your district's problems and all of the schools' problems around the country. That's not what the book is about. It's to help school leaders to think differently about their problems, and specifically the ones that have been persistent, like 3rd grade reading scores. If you can't read by the time you're done the 3rd grade, you're going to have a hard time reading to learn for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. And so we've got to do something about that between pre-K and when kids are 2. And that means we need to engage the community, or what other things need to happen. But take a look at the 7 models, and there's one in there that might be perfect for thinking differently about the reading scores. And the models aren't necessarily meant to be independent of one another. They can be used to augment thinking. So really proud of that work. 7 mind shifts for school leaders, Connie Hamilton, Joseph Jones on that one. And leaders are getting a ton from the models.
Well, I'm going to ask at the end of this conversation that you point listeners to where they can find all of your resources, TJ. And even though you and I chased some rabbits in this conversation, I want to wrap this up with a question that I like to ask experienced leaders like you. And that is, if you could sit down with coffee and a new leader, maybe somebody who's stepping into the role for the first time. Maybe there's a listener right now who's transitioning into their first AP position or principal position. And there's that 1 or 2 things you would tell them, like, hey, just hold on to these couple of ideas as you're stepping into leadership. What would be those things that you would leave listeners with to think about?
Yeah, I think about new leaders all the time, Will. My company, the Schoolhouse 302, we do induction programming for new leaders. So we've built program. This is our 6th year of doing induction program for new, mostly assistant principals, but some principals. So we run them through a program for them to be certified here in Delaware. And we're looking to scale that throughout the country because it works and it helps to accelerate new leaders into more of a position of confidence and to have the tools to run schools. Like I said, being a teacher is not necessarily the right training ground for being an assistant principal, and being an assistant principal is not necessarily the right training ground for being a principal. The jobs are just different. So I'm going to answer your question twice and really succinctly here. The first is for new assistant principals. I think about you all the time. In fact, real quick story. I was in a conference with a bunch of the principals. We were speaking at this district, and they were having a conference day with all of their administrators, professional learning, and they got the new leaders together during lunch. And I just went over there and I stood there and I was kind of like being weird. And one lady looks at me and goes, "Can we help you with something?" And I said, "No. I just want to stand here near these new leaders and just put off energy and positivity and hope that they get something from it, from the universe today, because new leaders, we love you, and they need as much support as we can give them." If you're a new assistant principal, here's the 2 questions that you ask every time that walkie-talkie goes off and every time a problem hits your lap. Do I need to solve this problem now? And am I the right person to solve it? New leaders are altruistic. They want to solve everybody's problems. The 3rd floor toilet paper is out on the boys' bathroom and you're running up the steps to the closet to get that toilet paper. That's not your job. The most important spaces is the classroom, and we can't get in the classroom because everything's urgent. But typically everything's urgent because we let it be. Does this problem need to be solved now? And does it need to be solved by me? And the answer to those questions is 90% of the time is no and no. And so you got to quit nickel and diming your day. And that's particularly assistant principals. New principals, your thinking and your leadership need to fall into 3 buckets. And I got the 3 buckets here. I'm verifying with Will. They're on my sticky note in my office. This is real. I just peeled it off and Will's looking at the sticky note. And the 3 buckets are this: vision. Do people know where we're going? Do I know what the future of our organization looks like? And can I articulate that? A clear and compelling vision. The second bucket is people and programs. What's working and what doesn't? There's people working and are getting better results than others. How do we replicate that? There's programs that don't work. We need to cut them out. And the third thing is innovation. What do we need to do differently tomorrow than we're doing today? And if you find your mind wandering off in any bucket other than those 3, you need to veer it right back into one of those buckets. And I can promise you that if you're in a space and you're outside of those 3 buckets, it might be because the vision isn't clear, or because the people and programs aren't working, or they're not working in harmony, or you haven't tried something different recently. You're almost always going to find yourself veering from those 3 and realizing that it's a problem with one of those 3 that got you off track.
TJ, I just so appreciate how practical you are, and how real you are. And I want listeners to be able to stay connected with your work. And of course, I know you do a lot of work in partnership with others, but how can listeners stay connected with you or reach out to you if they want to know more about your resources or connect with you for some of the PD and training that you do with leaders?
Sure thing. The best way to get a hold of me is theschoolhouse302.com, theschoolhouse302.com. It's all one word, theschoolhouse302. On our website, you can get into our newsletter. It's all free resources. We put out 2 different podcasts for school leaders. One's connected to the program that I just described for induction programming for new school leaders in Delaware. The other one's called Focus Ed. The other one's called Leading Better and Growing Faster with Joe and TJ. You can get our newsletter. We pump out content a couple times a week, blog posts, podcasts, big proponents of recommending books, specifically books outside of education. We try to blend business and education like we started on this podcast today. And theschoolhouse302.com is the best place to get resources. You can book Joe and I to speak at an event there. We have a tab that takes you to all 6 of our books, including pre-order on the newest one, which is about investing in your best. It's called Invest in Your Best. It's about what to do with our best people because we missed a boat with them too. And on social at TJ Vari, TJVARI on Twitter. I'm on Instagram now, Will, but you have to forgive me. I'm not a very good Instagram user, but I'm heavy on LinkedIn as well. If you look me up on LinkedIn, Dr. TJ Vari there. And yeah, I'm gonna tell you what, 608-347-6954. That's my cell phone number. Anybody who wants to reach out and talk about school leadership, then I'm available.
TJ Vari, thank you so much for the time that you've given today, because I know you were a busy man as a deputy superintendent and all of the work that you do along with Dr. Joseph Jones in supporting leaders in your area and through your podcast. I'm a big fan, and now I'm so happy to call you a friend. But thank you for your leadership. Thank you for the way that you're investing in schools and leaders. And Principal Matters listeners, I just want to encourage you this week as you're stepping into your work to think about that one thing that you're going to walk away from this conversation, because there was probably 30 things that TJ and I talked about, but what's that one thing that that's going to help you as you step into your day, whether you're a principal, an assistant principal, or a leader in another capacity, because you can take action on one thing today, even if you can't do it on 30. But I just want to remind you that the work that you're doing is so important, because what you do matters. And we'll talk to you again next week. You'll find free resources like this one at williamdparker.com. Subscribe for our free weekly newsletter, which contains bonus material, and also check out the links for Grow Academies, Masterminds, Executive Coaching, and Keynote presentations from my books, as well as from Principal Matters Associates. You can find out more under our speakers tab at williamdparker.com. Thank you for learning together, and thank you for doing what matters.